under those hard ER lights where everyone looks a little scared. The HOA president from my neighborhood shoved a citation into my chest and said, "Policy is policy." Like she ran the hospital too, and my wife Harper sat in a wheelchair next to me, 30 weeks along, fists pressed to her belly, breathing in quick little waves, while our car idled at the red-painted curb because every step from the parking lot felt like a mile. When you're timing contractions. You know what I mean? I told the woman my name was Mason, that I'm a paramedic, that the curb is a drop zone, and time is the only currency that matters in a place like this. And she smiled the way people do when they think paperwork beats pain. The triage nurse slid the clipboard out of her hand with 2 fingers and said, "Ma'am." Step aside, and the whole room seemed to exhale like someone cracked a window in a crowded bus. We rolled into vitals, while the badge was still gleaming under the fluorescence behind us. And I did what years on the ambulance taught me to do when chaos shows up in a pressed suit. I started a checklist in my head. Time, camera angles, names. Who saw what? Where the dome cams is pointed. All the little boring things that end up being the difference between being right and proving it. I wish I could tell you that was the first time I'd seen the badge woman. But our neighborhood is the kind of pretty that gets weaponized if the wrong person's holding the tape measure. Lawns like golf greens. Mailboxes that match a Facebook group where folks will argue for 3 days about a trash can being visible for 9 minutes, yeah. That happened, and the President Brenda loved saying, "We all agreed to the rules," like it was a church hymn, and she was the only one allowed to pick the song. She fined a Marine because his flag bracket was 2 degrees off center. She slapped a neon notice on a grandmother's door because her grandson needed a temporary ramp, and the wood didn't match the approved pallet. She called it standards. The rest of us called it humiliation. And most days, we swallowed it because mortgages don't move, and you learn to pick your piece. That night after the ER, when Harper finally settled in a quiet room, and the monitor stopped sounding like a drumbeat in my ears, I drove home past those perfect hedges and parked in the driveway and kept my hands on the wheel for a minute, just staring at our porch light, thinking about how she'd followed us into a place where rules serve people not the other way around, and tried to carry her power across a threshold. It didn't belong. And if you've ever had someone do that to you, you know the mix of anger and clarity that hits all at once. In the morning, I built the ramp, removable safe, clean edges, sanded, so a sock wouldn't snag. And by lunch, a bright orange paper flapped in the breeze under my porch light, unauthorized structure. Fines accruing big block letters, like a threat from a movie. So I took it down, smoothed the wrinkles, slid it into a blue folder with the date on top. Because evidence isn't loud, evidence is polite. Brenda likes a stage, so the next day she held a special compliance meet at the pool. Striped canopy, 2 bored guys beside her who nod like bobbleheads because they're afraid of being next. And she announced my fines were past $5 grand and a lien was possible. And I told her calm as an EKG line that she'd followed my wife and me into Ed Augustine. General tried to interfere with intake, that the hospital has cameras and logs, and I would be requesting footage, and her jaw did that little click. You know, the sound of a gear missing a tooth. But she recovered with a speech about community standards, while the gate camera blinked red at us like another silent witness. The day after I took my folder to risk management beige hallway toner. Smelled the kind of office where truth is written down, not argued. And I gave them the times and the names and the sequence. No spice, no exaggeration. Just the boring specifics that hold up when everything else falls apart. And security pulled the clips, curb entrance, triage. And there she was, in grainy black and white, with her paper like a badge, my wife folding forward with a gasp. The nurse's hand coming up like a stop sign. We watched in silence, the chain of custody printed warm from the machine. I signed, tucked it into the folder, and it felt like a brick in my hands. On the way home that night, I cut behind the tennis courts to meet a groundskeeper who said he had old inspection logs. But the man waiting was Eddie, the so-called safety liaison. Brenda pays to take pictures of driveways after dark. Not a bad guy, just a tired one. Jaw tight, hair cut too short. Like he's trying to stay inside a line, even when the line keeps moving. And he couldn't look at me when he said, "I can't carry it anymore." What she did at the hospital crossed a line. Then he handed me a small spiral notebook, like it was burning his fingers. Pages of dates and addresses and directives. In cramped writing, deliver notice without hearing, photograph after midnight, document ramp. Personal grievance, and his shoulders sagged in the way a man's do when the truth finally weighs more than his fear. "You'll use it?" he asked, and I said yes, but not to crush you, to stop this. And he nodded, once swallowed hard, and looked like he might actually sleep for the first time in months. The courthouse is all marble echo and old paper, and the woman at the records desk didn't smile, but she pushed Cedar Harbor Oaks Incorporation and bylaws across to me, like maybe she was rooting for anyone who did their homework. And I read highlighter. Sliding over clauses people forget on purpose. Medical accommodations cannot be denied without unanimous board approval and documented findings. Fines above a threshold require hearings and minutes. Foreclosure threats need certified letters and recorded votes. Simple guardrails. Nothing dramatic. When I stacked those pages next to Eddie's notebook and the hospital forms, the picture got sharp in that way that makes your stomach drop. Not because you're afraid, because you realize you're right, and you can prove it. Then the big envelope showed up under my door. Foreclosure may commence in 30 days. Pretty seal pressed into the flap like a family crest. So I carried it into the HOA office, where the AC lives at Arctic, and Brenda sat flanked by her two nods, and she told me they'd been patient. And I told her a foreclosure needs a vote, with minutes and prior notice, none of which exist. And I slid the bylaws over. Then Eddie's notes. Then mentioned the hospital tape, like it was just another page in the stack. And for the first time her mouth opened without a word attached to it. The nods looked at their hands, and I took my letter back and said, "You'll review," and left. If your town is anything like mine, the elementary school gym is where truth gets louder. Glossy floor metal chairs that screech when you stand, fluorescent lights that flatten everybody's face the same. And at the quarterly meeting, Brenda did her song about property values and order. And when she opened the mic, I walked up slow because my legs felt like rebar. And I said my name. Said I'm a paramedic. Said my wife is on bed rest because her pregnancy is high risk. And last week, your board president tried to stop emergency intake because she didn't like where we parked for 2 minutes, and the room tilted. You could feel it, like a boat shifting when everyone moves to the same side. And I held up the chain of custody, the bylaws, the notices without hearings. And I didn't raise my voice. I let the paper do the yelling. From the side aisle, a chair scraped, and Eddie stood with his hands shaking and said, "I was there. She told me to back her up no matter what." I saw the nurse push her hand away, and the air snapped like someone opened a window. In January, questions fired from the back. What about my nephew's ramp? Play the tape. You fined me for a truck that didn't fit my garage, and the board moved to suspend enforcement against my family, pending legal review. And yeah, there was applause. But the part that stuck to my ribs was how people stood a little taller while they clapped. 2 weeks later. In municipal court, narrow benches. Judge with a stare like a tape measure. The HOA lawyer tried to turn me into a hothead with a grudge. Asked if I'd misread a request for compliance as interference. And I told him I love rules. Rules keep people alive in my world. But a neighborhood badge doesn't get to cross a hospital line. Then the judge said, "Cue the footage," and we all watched in silence. Curb entrance, triage, a little movie about power meeting purpose and losing. And when the lights came back up, the judge granted an injunction, barred the HOA from touching any medical accommodation. At my address, scheduled a sanctions hearing, ordered an audit of the fine system, and an independent overseer for the next election paper doesn't swagger, but it can sure punch. We drove home to a street that looked the same and felt different waves, without the flinch behind them chalk drawings that didn't get power washed until the rain came on its own. A Marine saluting my daughter in a stroller like showing up is an act of bravery. And maybe it is. Maybe a neighborhood remembering the difference between order and fear is its own kind of courage. Brenda resigned a month later. Health reasons, the email said, and moved 2 towns over, where I hope she learns to enjoy her garden without measuring anyone else's. Eddie cuts keys at the hardware store and gives little discounts. He pretends are sales because he's still paying down his conscience. Harper made it to 37 weeks, and we gave our girl a middle name from my dad, the one who taught me that boring details save lives, and I still keep his old leather kit on the shelf where I can see it when I walk by, as a reminder that service is supposed to be quiet and steady, not loud and punishing. I know someone's going to say I should have just followed the rules, and I get it, fences are useful. But fences aren't walls, and authority isn't a costume. And if you've ever had a clipboard waved in your face while your life was tipping on 2 wheels, you know exactly why I pushed back. So tell me, was I right to make noise, or was Brenda just doing her job? And I'm the guy who made a scene. Where's the line between order and overreach? Where you live, what did you tolerate? What did you finally say no to drop your take in the comments? Share what you've seen and what you still wrestle with. Because communities don't get better quietly. They get better when regular people decide policy serves people, not the other way around.